And as you sit here, breathing in and breathing out with awareness, just allow yourself to arrive in this moment. I'm so excited to have this beautiful conversation this morning. So excited to be here with such wonderful, amazing spirits, beautiful souls coming together for inspiring conversation. With gratitude in your heart for Dr. Serio and all he brings to the community. Gratitude for this day. What an amazing February day. Gratitude for all that is. And then allow the heart and the ears to open. Allow yourself to listen consciously, to hear whatever it is that you're meant to hear. And to allow this conversation to touch each and every one of our hearts in ways that empower our healing, in ways that unite us, bring us closer together, and in ways that allow us, that empower us to come to know our source more profoundly, in meaningful ways. And so placing the right hand on the heart and the left hand over the right, I'll ask you to join me in one beautiful communal Om. Take a nice breath in. Om. Bowing the head to the heart, acknowledging all that is. And then drawing the face to center, release the hands. Hello. So good to see each and every one of you. Some faces are familiar, some faces are new. I was previously known as Sudha. I'm now known as Swamini Shraddhananda Saraswati. And if you can say that, you get a star. And maybe a little enlightenment too. We'll see. Yeah, so last year when I was here, I think it was last year or the year before, I was in white. And now I'm in orange. And that's because my I don't like the word status, but I guess my devotion has taken on a new title. And I'm now a female monk in the Hindu tradition that is more rightfully called Sanatana Dharma in the order of Saraswati. And the color orange is the color of discipline and devotion. It is a color of renunciation. And so following my husband's passing, he had been living with stage 5 colon cancer for about 5 years. He passed away November 23rd, about a year and a half ago now. And then that following year, in 2019 November, I brought his ashes to India to be offered to the Ganges River, which is a symbol of the Divine Mother. And while we were there, my guru gratefully said yes when I asked him if I could take my vows of renunciation to become a monk. I had asked him 12, 13 years ago, but the answer at that time was no, because I was a married woman. And I had responsibilities to my family and my children, and who are grown, and were grown at that time too, but I was still a married woman. But now, as of my husband's passing, I was eligible to take my vows, and so I did. And then from here, it's just deepening of the practice, deepening of the faith, and deepening of the service. And so my life in this moment and in all moments is just about how I can serve you, how I can serve everyone who is on the path of seeking and looking for union, unity, compassion, joy, the end of suffering, the truth. And that's what I'm here to speak with you about today. The truth. But before I start talking about that, I have a little interesting story about this color orange. So I do like my Starbucks lattes. These days I drink them decaffeinated. So I went to Starbucks and I was in line. I gave him my order over that little intercom thing, And I pull up to the window and this young man, very enthusiastic young man, says, "Oh my goodness, I love the orange. It's so absolutely beautiful and wonderful. It makes me want to smile." And then all of a sudden his smile got serious. And he said, looks like you've been convicted of something. I sort of have. And I drove away with no further conversation. So it's interesting how people react, and they do. They react to the orange. I thought that people reacted to the white. No. They react to the orange. They're like, you really like orange. I'm like, yeah, it's a color. So what I'd like to do is to go around the circle and have each one of you say your name and just a small sentence on what you think truth is. And we'll start in this direction.
Wow, that's tough. Well, my name is Jane. I know that part. I don't know, being honest.
Okay, very good.
I'm Nancy, and I guess maybe I'm thinking truth might be the secret to living a good life.
Ah, good.
I'm Dale. I think I'll say truth is elusive.
Very good, very good.
I'm Doris, and I like to think of truth as the triune God.
Very good, very good.
I'm Pat, and I think truth is just being honest to yourself and others.
Yeah, very good.
My name is Craig, and I'm having trouble differentiating between truth in terms of consistency with what I experience and observe in the world, and truth as a concept by which to live.
Very good. Now?
As a Democrat, I say truth matters. As a spiritual person and Christian, I say the truth shall set me free. As an attorney, I would say that people would say there are two sides to every story. I learned as an attorney there are about 5 sides to every story. So truth can vary.
Yeah, you just summed up this paper.
Wow.
There we go, we can all go home now.
He also said what I was going to say. My name's Cynthia, and I was saying truth is that which sets you free.
Absolutely. The title of today's talk, yes?
My name is Ruth Ann. Well, I think of truth as, I guess it depends on the person's perspective of something.
Okay, very
My
good.
name is Nelson, and with the attorney, I'm going to say truth is factual.
So many interesting questions to work with here. Yeah, very good. Interesting statements.
Good morning. My name is Janet, and I too equate truth with the real. And I acknowledge that you and I each are looking at something from our own perceptions. But I do believe that somewhere, perhaps outside our perception, there is the real or the truth.
Absolutely. Yeah, very good.
I'm KP, it's short for Krishna Priya. I think that truth is, we can find truth in the divine.
I'm Sandy, and I have trouble with the idea of, I don't think about truth, or maybe I do, because I have a hard time with it. And I think, like Jen, and there's probably a truth beyond, or truths with a big T that are always true. And then other truths, I'm not sure about.
Very good.
My name is Charlie. I spent 2 years in an ashram back in the 70s, which put me on what has always felt as the right path ever since then. I've circled around. I now practice what's called scientific Christianity, which is a way of healing using the Holy Spirit. And to me, truth is that thing that cannot be named that I experience when I go deep in meditation. It's the experience of all that is.
Very nice.
I think split it maybe to physical truth. You know, this is a chair I'm sitting on. This is real.
And then spiritual truths that just give me head to toe shivers that I know is true.
Yes, wonderful.
My name is Harry. Truth is Dharma. Truth is aletheia, which in Greek means not forgetting. But more so, truth is the awareness of the presence of God in all things, in all persons.
Very nice. Absolutely. Wow, so much to work with. Yes. So truth is evasive. It is. Truth is evasive. Each one of us gave similar answers, but a little different answers. Many people gave answers about truth that appear to be personal. You know, it is subjective to one's own life experience. Some gave an idea about truth that is objective, factual, based in data and argumentation and debate. A very important function in the Tibetan traditions is the debate to get to the truth. And we had a group of Tibetan monks come and visit us, and they did the debate for us. And they stood within this circle. They created a circle, and they stood within this circle. And they were very kind and very peaceful, and they bowed to each other. Then they started. And it was, yes. I was like, whoa. These gentlemen who became fierce in their debating, and we didn't know what they were saying because they were speaking in Tibetan. But at the end of it, they stopped, and they bowed, and they were grateful for each other, and they turned around and walked away. No grudges held. Very interesting, yeah. And then some of you gave a definition that had to do with something more esoteric. God. What is that? You know? So what I'd like to do, I've given you this little handout, which is just a few of the traditions in the world right now that talk about God and talk about truth and have an idea or an opinion about what truth can be. And maybe we'll work through some of these and we'll get caught up in some conversation and then we'll work in a few others. But to just begin to say that truth is non-philosophical senses to indicate such qualities as fidelity, moral rectitude, and reality, which is right in line with what many of you said. So truth is non-philosophical senses. So you know what is correct, you know what is moral, you know in your own life experience what is reality, the chair that you're sitting in, the partner that you are experiencing life with, the love that you have for a child, a spouse, a parent, or a friend. These are all personal truths that are not philosophical necessarily. They're dear to you. They're dear to you, and so you have a sense of connection and loyalty to that and see it as the truth. But someone used the word consistent before, and that's also something that is consistent is the truth. So if it continually shows up in the same way, we like to see that as proof that it is valid, And so that is definitely another way of looking at the truth. Like winter is true in this region, is it not? Oh, not this year. Truth is changing. We had a half an inch of snow this year. Half an inch. And our plow person came and plowed. And I didn't argue with him about it because I can only imagine the suffering, you know? Yeah. So we look at the consistency of winter, and for many, many years we consistently believe that winter in the Northeast is true. But now we have to shift a little bit according to circumstances and recognize that maybe that truth has fluctuations to it. That's not comfortable in many different instances because we like to experience consistency as a way of walking through life safely, knowing what to expect, you know, being able to tell the future a little bit. Not having to deal 100% completely with the unknown, which makes us quite fearful at times. And truth is God versus truth is my opinion. So something else to think about. Truth is God, truth is my opinion. But we have to ask a question following that statement. When does God become an opinion? When does God become merely an opinion? Does anybody have a thought about that? Harry, do you have a thought about that? Under what circumstance is God an opinion and not truth?
That almost sounds like we are objectifying God. That we're putting God out there. But in my way of thinking, God is in all of us, and collectively we are God. And also with the universe.
So we could then maybe say that when we are living from a place of unity, when we are living from a place of acknowledging the presence of God in every being, in everything, good or bad, God is there, then that God is truth.
And evil is the aberration of that truth.
Yeah. But when we are living from a place of separation, when I use God as an excuse to demean, to belittle, to harm another, no matter whether it is another person, another living being, or the planet itself, then my perception of God may be true to me, but is it actually that truth? That's a very big question in today's world, where there's so much separation based on ideas and concepts of God. And I find that to be both sad, unfortunate, and, because I'm an intellectual, slightly amusing. Because if you go into any tradition, no matter what tradition it is, they all say the same thing. God is the truth. And the unity that God has manifested in this universe is part of that truth. Our relationship to each other is part of that truth. So to use God as a separating factor, as a harmful factor, rather than seeing the beautiful continuity of intention, is unfortunate, and it causes a lot of harm and violence in the world. It causes us to look at each other with distrust instead of love. So in truth, there's a place for love also. Human love, yes, but a different kind of love as well, a divine love. The ability to love unconditionally. The ability to accept another person for having different opinions, different perspectives, different perceptions of things, and still loving anyway. I'd like to just look a little bit at a couple of these traditions, and looking under Judaism, which has many different facets to it. In Orthodox Judaism, truth is revealed in the Word of God, in the Hebrew Bible, and in the words of some of the sages of the Talmud. In Hasidic Judaism, the community leaders are also considered to be the embodiment of truth. In conservative Judaism, not every word is truth, because that truth can vary from generation to generation. So what was true in the 1950s may not be relevant today. So why even spend time there? Spend time working within the truth that is relevant today to the problems and the challenges of today. And in Reform Judaism, there are kernels of truth in every religion. And that statement particularly, I appreciate very deeply. It is also shared within the Baha'i tradition, which states that truth is found in unity. The unity of religions, the unity of prophets, and the unity of the beings of the world. So in the Baha'i tradition, they state that truth is something that God progressively reveals to us through every single tradition. Because in our human form, we can only ever take small bits of the truth. If we were given the entire truth, plain as day right in front of us, we wouldn't be able to handle it. Our nervous systems would crash, our brains would overload, and we would not be able to deal with that. Because, in large part, we have not prepared ourselves to. We have, generally speaking, lived lives that have been embedded in the ego, which is self-satisfying and self-concerned, which is healthy sometimes and unhealthy at other times. To live a life that is preparing itself for truth is to become selfless. According to many traditions, it is to be of service to community. It is to be humble. It is to be honest. It is to be studying of your own tendencies of harm and violence and then working actively to change those things. It is to abide in the path that's put out by every single tradition. In its own words, of course, the 10 Commandments, the Yamas and the Niyamas. It's to practice those ethics and those virtues in life that empower us to be with the truth and to accept it completely with no excuses and no justifications. Oh, love is truth. Accept. See, that is not, if you're saying something with a but, accept, or separating something out from it, then that's not the truth. That's only ever part of the truth. God manifested everything, many of the teachings say. Therefore, everything is God. Therefore, everything has truth in it. And to see anything as not holding some semblance of the progressive truth is to be in a mind of separation. To be in a mind of separation, according to the Buddhist traditions, is to be in a mind of suffering. And in the Buddhist traditions, they state 4 noble truths the Buddha found in his deep, deep meditation. He said the first is that suffering exists. It's called dukkha. Suffering exists. It's everywhere. Without exception. Every living being suffers. It's universal truth. And every living being doesn't necessarily want to. That's also a truth. But truth exists. That's suffering. The second noble truth is that it has a root cause. And suffering's root cause is the grasping of the ego. Is that when we grasp at things, when we say, that's mine and you can't touch it, that might be yours, but I want it. That the grasping brings us into a place of potential violence against ourselves and each other. And as a result, truth becomes lost to us. The greater, the more inclusive truth of unity. And we become embedded in concepts of separation and competition and harm to get what we want. In other words, in the Christian tradition, we become sinners. We become sinners because of our suffering. Now, why do we become sinners rather than allow the truth to heal us? Is that not the quest of every Christian? Of every Jewish individual? Of every Buddhist?
It's the path of least resistance.
Oh, it sure is. Yes, it sure is. It's so true. Yeah. Suffering will consume you whole. It doesn't care. It doesn't ask you for anything except just don't do anything. But healing by surrender to that greater, more inclusive truth requires something of you. It requires you stand up. It requires that you live a life of virtue. It requires that you commit to the concepts of self-study and surrender. And in our human tendencies, I always feel like such a Debbie Downer when I say this, but it's just the truth. In our human tendencies make us a little too lazy for that. Yeah, a little, right? It does. I mean, like we have our pet projects, where we're willing to come forward and do the work. But then when you have something you're not interested in, or something that you prefer to be angry over in an unhealthy way, then you become completely resistant to the work and the excuses come forward. So it's a little bit of a form of laziness. We see it vehemently on Facebook nowadays. And we're coming into a new election period where we're going to start seeing more of it. Everybody's talking about love, love, love. Love is truth. Love is God. And yet they hate each other over a candidate. That's a disconnect completely. Don't hate each other over the candidates. Converse with each other. Converse with each other. No one in this world can bring the truth forward more profoundly than you. You can bring the truth forward of unity. You can bring the truth forward of love. You can bring the truth forward of no separation if you live that truth. And if you live that truth, then hate has no room to thrive in your garden. It won't grow there. And your heart will touch other hearts. There's a theory called 99 monkeys. Anybody heard of that? Yeah, the 99 monkey theory. I think we talked about that actually last year or the year before. The 99 monkey theory. If enough people live in some semblance of this higher, more inclusive, more profound truth, others will inevitably follow. It's like a magnet. So suffering exists, and suffering exists because it has a source, and that source is grasping. We grasp it wanting to be right. We grasp it wanting to be rich. We grasp it wanting to be popular. We grasp it wanting to be important. And those graspings lead us to suffering. They don't lead us to the truth. Then the third noble truth that the Buddha said is that suffering can be eliminated. Who wants to take a guess at how? How do we end suffering? Surrender. Stop grasping. And there's an eightfold path. There's many, actually. There's many paths that teach us how to stop grasping and how to be more and more completely present to truth. And Buddha's eightfold path, I have it listed out right here for you. Buddha's eightfold path is to have right view, right resolve, right speech, right action or conduct, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right awakening. That's a lot of work.
Yeah, right. I was thinking that.
No wonder suffering's winning. Would you agree? I mean, yes. So we do pick and choose a little bit. You know, let's hope that we're picking and choosing mindfully what our battles are going to be in this life so that we get the most out of them. But the reality is also this: in many traditions they say, pick one, master it. And if you pick one and master it, you will have mastered all of it. So let's just look at that and say, right view. What is a right view of the world? Well, according to many traditions, they would say a right view is nonviolence, unity, and unconditional love. Is to see things with equanimity while maintaining those qualities within yourself of nonviolence, of unity, and of unconditional love. If you live your life perceiving God everywhere, holding into that space of equanimity, while walking forward with these three qualities, and if you become a master of that, will you not have addressed all these others?
Not always. How would that have stopped the Holocaust?
This is very true. Now, we'll skip forward a little bit to the Hindu part. Yeah. So Hindu, more appropriately called Sanatana Dharma, states that there is a way to take a stand which will appear to the one who does not know as violence, but which is actually not. Now we need to look at what the definition of violence could be. Violence that comes from a place of hate. Violence that comes from a place of demeaning. Violence that comes from a place of egotistical judgment and power-mongering. Is this not different than actions taken on behalf of upholding goodness?
Yes, it is.
Yeah,
Yes.
completely. So then we could, if we are all in some level of agreement with that, we could say that the people who moved to act to stop the Holocaust were not committing violence. They were protecting goodness and unity and potential of love. Does that make sense? It's not an excuse. So we could never use love as an excuse for violence, saying, "Oh, I'm doing this because I love. I'm annihilating these people because I love God." No. Nope. That doesn't wash. We don't use God as an excuse. That's not part of the truth. That's part of the suffering. How do we know when the action that we commit is in line with the higher truth? Is when we understand the action that needs to be taken and the action that doesn't. What I mean by that. So there's 2 monks, and they're going off to the temple for this huge festival. And there was a rainstorm. And this woman who was going to the festival also was trapped on a little mud island. How she didn't have her sari ruined, I'll never know. But she's trapped on this little island, and she's surrounded by water. And the monks are walking by, and she says, Can you help me? Can you help me? I'm stuck here, and I have to get to the festival." Without thinking twice, the one monk rolls up his robes and walks through the water, picks her up, carries her through the water, puts her down, wishes her a good day. The other monk is absolutely appalled. He says, "You took a vow to never touch a woman. How could you? How could you just throw your vow off to the side, go pick her up, have contact with her flesh, and act like it's no big deal?" The man said, "She needed support. I supported her. Let's go. We're going to be late for the festival." So they're walking down the road silently. A little while later, again, he explodes. "How could you? I can't believe that you would think so little of your vows." He says, "We have to go to the festival. Let's just talk about this later." They're almost there. He stops again. And he says, "Brother, I don't even know what to do with you. I am just so appalled and disgusted at your behavior." And the monk turned around and said, "Brother, I picked her up and put her down back there. You're still carrying her." You need to know when to act and when you don't need to act. And when you understand what is right action, then you'll understand truth of action. Otherwise, it'll be an excuse. And what's it an excuse for? It's an excuse for the ego to feel powerful. Kick a guy when he's down. Kick a woman when she's down. Or, in the words of Michelle Obama, when other people go low, we go high. Because we look to see, is action necessary? Are words necessary? Does that make sense? Yeah. Do you have reflections about that? Anything you'd like to contribute so far?
Well, when you're talking about doing right action, even if you don't believe in violence, I think of Dietrich Bonhoeffer. He was willing to give his life because he knew what was happening in the Holocaust was wrong, and he stood up against it.
That's
and
right.
he tried to recruit others to do likewise. They weren't interested.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a beautiful story that I recently came across of a young girl. I think she was 16 years old. She was in a camp. She was a prisoner. She was in a line, and I guess that the practice was if anybody stepped out of the line that they got shot. And so they treated these individuals so just absolutely horrifically, stripped them down, said, "You don't move out of that line or you'll be shot." And the soldier was walking by the 16-year-old girl, and I'm trying to remember the exact words that were said, so I'm going to paraphrase, please forgive me. She looked at the guard, at the soldier, and she said to the German soldier, "Will you really shoot me if I step out of this line?" And he looked at her and he said, "I won't, but someone else will." And so she stepped back and she ran and she lived.
And she lives.
And she lived. Powerful. Powerful. To know when to act and when not to act.
In our Tai Chi training, we were shown a stance where we could become perfectly still, inside and outside, and we could not be moved. People would literally come and they could not push us over or touch us because we were totally rooted in the truth,
Completely.
in a completely quiet and peaceful place, and we were grounded in the energy of the universe.
Absolutely. And that's the whole teaching of Tai Chi. Absolutely. That's the teaching. That's the core teaching of every tradition. If you are so grounded in the truth of the universe, of the cosmos, of God, then your ground is stable. You will not be shaken. And you will know. You will know what right action is. You will know what right view is. You will know. Because it won't cause you suffering.
Martin Luther stood. He used that word, stand. Here I stand.
That's right.
And that is what gave him his, well, he was receiving God's strength as far as I'm concerned. It all came from the source for him. But that was a powerful example.
Absolutely. And Gandhi also, another powerful example, the moment he died. Gandhi had his assassin right in front of him, pointing a gun at him. And he didn't say, "Oh, no, don't kill me, don't kill me, don't kill me." He sat and he said, "Ram, Ram, 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 Ram." Because he knew in that moment he could not change what was going to happen. So he had a choice. He could either fall into his suffering or he could fall into the arms of God. And he fell into the arms of God. And he died speaking God's name, one of God's names. Yeah. So now, take a moment and think about that. What would you need to do in your life, starting now, so that the moment you die, that moment, on that last exhalation, you fall into the arms of God and not into the arms of your perceived suffering? Wow. That's a very big question. That might be an even bigger question than what is truth. Yeah. In the Sanatana Dharma tradition in Hinduism, your last breath in this life is your most important breath because it dictates your next life. So if you, there's another beautiful story. I love my stories, you know that. So there's a monk and he's a renunciate who lives out in the forest and has very little communication with any people. He sits there and he chants day in and day out. And he's preparing for his final breath. And he knows that, that how many times he repeats the name of God, how many times he sits when he wants to get up and move out of discomfort of the body, how many times he allows suffering to win will be less likely that he will have the strength in that final moment of life to fall into the arms of God. So he dedicates himself in the forest to this isolated life where he's just dealing with his own issues. And he's coming into reverent prayer every day, all day, and reverent, his own service to God by being present to God. He talks to other monks every once in a while as they come through. Well, one day he has to go down to the river to get water for his bath, and on the way he finds a little baby deer, and she's hurt. He takes compassion on the deer, and he picks the deer up and brings the deer back to his hut, and says, "Well, I will just take care of the deer until she's able to take care of herself, and then I'll let her go." But they develop a bond, and the deer stays with him, and he loves this deer so emphatically, like his japa has fallen away a little bit. His mantra, his chanting practice has fallen away a little bit because he's concerned with her getting fed at certain times during the day. He's concerned with her having what she needs, enough water, enough attention. But he's still very devout. But now a little bit more of his time is going to the deer. This is a man who has spent his whole life preparing to fall into the arms of God on his last breath. So the day comes when he's going to die. And he knew it was coming, so he arranges to have somebody else come in and take care of the deer and make sure the deer is okay, because she's just so used to humans now. She would never be able to survive without their support. And he's got everything in place, and he feels very good about this. He's like, it's all good. I'm just going to sit here and I'm going to chant Ram, 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 Ram until my last breath comes. So very devout. It's just about time. He takes his last breath in. He's Ram. And as he takes his last breath out, fear takes hold of him. And he turns to the monk who's holding space for his death and says, will you take care of the deer? And he dies. And because the deer is the last thing he thought, what does he become in his next life? A deer. The stories never stop. They're so wonderful. So now you've got to ask yourself, what do you need to do starting now so that at that last breath you can fall into the truth of God and not fear over whatever it is that's still on this earth that you perceive yourself to be separated from? Would he have been separated from that deer he loved so much just because he died? No. If you adhere to unity, to God-given oneness, the two can never be separated. But the human ego is so weak and fragile that it thinks it can. It denies the truth and allows fear to take hold and allows fear to create the roots of suffering. Faith, is a big one. Faith. Thoughts. I'd put Harry on the spot. Thoughts.
Well, I'm thinking that when my daughter was born, I gave her middle name as Aletheia, which is the Greek word for truth. And as I mentioned before, Aletheia is a combination of which means a negative, and lethe, which is forgetting. So in other words, truth is remembering. Mm-hmm. And to the ancient Greeks, everyone is born with truth within them, but they forget what it is. And it's only in remembering that truth that they become whole again. And I think Jack Kerouac, in calling his book the Dharma Bums, if you remember that book from the 50s, that was a quest of the Beat generation to rediscover that eternal truth. And so when we recognize that truth within us, we become whole.
Correct. Yeah. Mm-hmm. We become whole, but here's something that's also really important to remember. That monk understood his wholeness. He had his practices in place. He remembered, but then he forgot. So our life is a complicated journey of remembering and forgetting. And we actually often do both in the same moment, depending on what it is that we're focused on. If I'm looking at someone who it's easy to love, maybe I'm remembering on some level. And if I'm looking at someone that it's easy to hate, maybe I'm forgetting. And maybe both those people are right in front of me in the same moment. So now the work that I have to do is come into a place where I see them both in the light of love, no matter what my personal opinion of them is. I always like to share, people have so many questions about the current political condition of our country. And what I like to share with them is this. If you consider yourself a good Christian, a good Jew, a good Hindu, a good whatever, good spiritualist, whatever name you put to yourself, then maybe the more effective practice is to condemn the policy and not the person. Because if you wish to live in the light of unity, then you need to also accept that every single thing that exists has the potential light of God in it. That includes the person making the policy, who is making a harmful policy because of the level of suffering disconnection and disbelief or incorrect belief that they have. So condemn the policy, but don't condemn the person. Because don't you want every person to be free? Don't you want? We have a little joke at the ashram. We say, under the rules of unity, and according to the words of the Buddha, we can all climb to the top of the mountain, but none of us can stay there. We must come back to this physically manifested world as long as one person or living being remains in a state of suffering. We must come back and do the work of alleviating suffering. So Joe the accountant better get his stuff together, because the rest of us are ready. But we share a responsibility for Joe in accounting. We have a responsibility to not contribute to his suffering. And then maybe he'll finally get up from his desk and walk with us, rather than sit there and deny. Does that make some kind of sense? It's hard. I'm not saying it's easy.
That was a point of yesterday, Transfiguration Sunday. You can't live on the mountain. The work has to be done in the valley.
That's right. Completely. Absolutely. And the work is a bloody mess. In Hinduism, in Sanatana Dharma, there's a goddess named Kali. She's a black goddess. She's black like the night. She's got large eyes that are bloodshot. She's got fangs and a lolling tongue dripping with blood. I know, it's such a visual, right? Totally. I love Kali. She's the goddess of destruction. She is often depicted naked, with the exception of a mala, prayer beads, a mala of bloody severed heads, and a skirt of bloody severed arms and legs.
Oh. Nice outfit.
Completely. Not the person you'd want to run into on a, yeah, totally. But here's the thing. For all of the fear that image invokes in us, there is a truth it can invoke in us also, if we choose. And that truth is that the mother, who in Hinduism represents absolute love, in the midst of her absolute love, she understands and illustrates for us the necessity of dismemberment. Oh, wow. And it's a bloody mess. Dismemberment of what? The ego. The part of you that would harm any other living thing. Out of your anger, out of distaste, out of judgment. To dismember that. And then for her, as the mother, because she already is the truth, she doesn't have the work to do, we do. She wears that to remind us of the necessity of it. Don't get lost in what you perceive to be your healthy ego, because the ego is a trickster like the coyote. And it will talk you into believing that your views are healthy, when in reality, perhaps you're using your words as daggers, trying to kill someone's heart, even more dead than it already is.
You mentioned motherhood and dismemberment. I think the act of a mother giving birth is dismembering. They're two people connected.
That's right. Yeah.
So there is a dismembering going on when you're giving birth, and mother.
Completely. And the mother herself has to dismember in order for that birthing to happen.
Yes.
Yes, completely. There's so much beautiful symbology, is there not?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we say, don't be afraid of Kali. See her as the inspiration of the work that must be done. And there's this line of 10, what they call wisdom goddesses, and down the line a little bit, there is another goddess named Bhuvaneshwari. She's very similar to Kali. She looks very much like her. She's a bit more blue than she is black. And her garland of skulls and skirt of severed arms and legs don't have any flesh and blood on them. Oh, got to pick the bones clean. Got to pick the bones clean. You got to go into the self-study. And in order to come close to that truth of God, you've got to resolve every aspect of yourself that is resisting it, that is building a wall against it, that is stopping you from knowing it. So the work of truth, by far, is not for the lazy human. The work of suffering is easy. Totally easy. But the work of truth is not. And the thing to also remember, and there's so many things to remember with this, is there not? Like, we could sit here for weeks and talk about this.
You needed more handouts.
Yeah, as I was writing this, I was like, I'm totally not going to stay on, like, this is just for you, for your interest. But the other thing to remember is that, and it's very important, that on a level of our being, we need to know that our work, our dedication, our self-study is not so we can manipulate others into accepting what we have accepted. There's a very important part of this that states the individualized path. That you're going to be on your path, you're going to be on your path. Each one of us is going to be on our individual path, which is going to look very different. And maybe it's easier for one of you to find God in the flower. And maybe it's easier for one of you to find God in the human. And maybe it's easier for one of you to find God in the stars. None of you are wrong. Every one of us is only progressively experiencing the truth. And in this lifetime, you will experience it in the way that you're meant to. And I should not be hyper concerned about that unless there is some kind of unjust harm happening in the world. I should not be hyper concerned with the way you see God. I should just be grateful that you do. And concern myself with me and what walls and resistances I have put up to that. I had a conversation with my nephew this morning, and we have very different perspectives on some things. And what I said to him in one part of the conversation was, why are we so fearful and concerned about topics that are not yet in front of us when we are not even willing to take care of that which is? Work on what's present to you. Work on what's right in front of you, because that's where you are. Try not to place yourself too often into an unknown future. And try not to dwell in a past that is already done and dead. Where are you now? What work needs to be done today? If you come into these eightfold path, the 10 Commandments, the yamas and the niyamas, if you come into the 3 unities of the Baha'i, whatever your tradition teaches you, if you come into a profound practice of that, you will inevitably have a beautiful impact on the future as it's meant to be. But the future is not just for you. The future is not there to make you comfortable. The future does not come around to prove that you were right and everybody else was wrong. The future happens as a very complicated series of consequences. There are 8 billion people in the world. The future will hold, at a minimum, 8 billion opportunities every second for the eyes and the heart to open and suffering to end. It's more complicated than if you would just agree with me, everything will be good. Does that make sense? So on some level, the truth is also a reflection of that complication, of that, in our current state of being, our inability to really know it, to know the entirety of the truth. So we say, if you haven't prepared yourself to know the entirety of the truth in any given moment, then focus on a few things. Harm none. Serve all. Love all. To the very best of your ability. And go inward as often as possible, so that you come to know yourself. Dr. Serio said before the practice of, I apologize, I forget which one it was that you referenced, but in Hinduism there's a similar practice, neti neti. Neti neti, it's not this, it's not this. We say neti neti when we look at a thing and we're seeking God. We say, not that, it's not that, it's not that, it's not that. It's not only that. It's not only that. If we're ever looking at only one thing, the tree, the flower, the person, and looking for God in only that, then we're missing the truth. We need to open our eyes wider in what Rumi calls our first eyes. The eyes that see everything as one. God is not just a little tiny light inside of you. God is not just one flower in a bed of flowers. God is the air you breathe. God is the atmosphere, the density of the earth, the water that flows across its surfaces, the mountains that spring up. If we want to see the truth of God, then we need to know that God is really everywhere. Everywhere, without exception. That requires a lot of work.
And that is Zen too. The
That is so
awareness
Zen.
of God.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
The remembrance part reminds me of the procedure in Christian communion. The wording is, "This is my body and blood given for you. Do this in remembrance of me."
That's right. Yeah.
Remembrance. Very, very important word.
I just got chills. Like head to toe. Yeah. Yeah. Such a beautiful remembrance.
Mm-hmm.
And think of that word means.
Yes.
Of reconnecting.
Remember.
Putting together.
Put together your bodily parts to become a body.
Never be separated. Yeah. Now granted, there's some, you got to dismember the ego. You got to dismember your beliefs. The types of beliefs that cause harm. The things that are good, you leave them alone. Don't fix that which is not broken. But if it needs to be taken apart a little bit, then you take it apart so that you understand better. But never forget the reunion. And the beautiful thing about yoga is that what the word yoga means. I'm not talking about the yoga postures. That's just like one tiny little speck of sand on a beach of yoga. The word yoga itself means to be reunited with that. And so if anything that we are committing ourselves to in thought, action, or intention is not done with that intention of reunification, then we know immediately that is wrong action. What you could call sin. Because it's going to bring about either a dullness and lethargy or a harm. And we could say dullness and lethargy are harmful. So always with the mind of reunification. Is this bringing me closer to God? Is this bringing me closer to truth? Is this bringing me closer? Or is this taking me further away? What time do we go to?
We usually go to 11:30 with comments, questions, or whatever.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but go ahead. Yeah.
How are we doing time-wise? It's
11 o'clock.
So. Okay, great.
Excuse me.
So let me ask questions.
Yeah, if I may, I'd
answer questions.
like to back up a little bit to your story of the two monks and the one who took the vows in order to save the woman who was stuck in the mud. destructive fire in Yellowstone Park. And people were very dismayed and so on. But once it had burned itself out, people who study such things were rather surprised at how quickly the land recovered, the variety of new growth that was springing up, and they realized, and I'm not sure how new a realization it was, realized that this was in effect a necessary fire. The forest was old, trees were dying because of the shade that was created by the trees. New plants were not springing up. The fire was actually a way of nature's way of renewing the forest and enabling a whole new forest to replace the old one. Excuse me. Donald asked a while ago, if what you were suggesting could have stopped the Holocaust. I'm afraid not. However, looking at things in a very, very, very broad perspective, reminiscent of the forest fire in Yellowstone Park, as a result of Hitler's insanity, the whole Nazi movement, and so on, and the horror of the Holocaust, which is probably differentiated from a long, long historical tradition of people wiping out other whole groups of people. Probably what makes the Holocaust stand out is the magnitude of destruction in such a short time. But anyway, as a result of that, and of Hitler's being defeated, Germany has become a kind of moral exemplar within the European Union and among Western nations.
Yes.
And if they persist, one would hope that other nations will wake up and begin to follow that example more closely. It may be that in the grander scheme of things, Nazism, World War II, was a necessary thing to provide such a nation, in the same way that, European nations, scourged by two terrible world wars within a single generation, have now enjoyed 7 decades of peace and prosperity that probably would not have happened without the lessons taught by the two world wars.
I appreciate what you're saying, and I see a lot of validity there. I think there's one additional piece that can kind of soothe our anger over such atrocities. And that's to understand that when we look out into the universe and we believe, we have faith that God is everywhere, that this is God's creation, and that God is also part of God's creation because it came from God. We can look at nature just as an example and say that fire wasn't personal. That fire wasn't personal. It was a cycle. There's a cycle of fire, and there's a cycle of growth. There's a cycle of destruction. There's a cycle of birth. And in many traditions, they talk about this. They say there's birth, there's maintenance, and there is death. Death leads to another birth. So this is a cycle that is very natural to the universe. And while we like to pride ourselves on being above nature's cycles, we're not at all. All you have to do is look at your day from the moment you wake up until the moment that you go to sleep, and you will find that you are in the midst of one of these cycles where you wake up in the morning and maybe everything is happy and joyful, something happens, you go into some anger or frustration or depression or some other part of the cycle. Something in the afternoon, the sun rises high in the sky, suddenly you feel energetic and happy. So you go through these cycles too. I go through them. We all go through them because we're part of nature, which is part of God, which is not necessarily personal. But we, as sentient beings who have this special form of consciousness, make it personal. And when we make it personal, what we find is that certain segments of the global community will lash out and try to eliminate and annihilate other segments of it. So the problem that we're dealing with is that we don't really know our place, and we're in the midst of these cycles that are uncomfortable, that are messy, and that cause us such inner turmoil that we become a lesser version of ourselves. The Nazis did it. Napoleon did it. Jim Jones did it. KKK still does it. Our government is doing it. The thing that I look at when I think about Hitler's Germany, I agree with what you're saying. I'm just trying to add to it. What I think about when I look at that is I ask myself, is there any possibility, not that we could have changed it, because we can't go back to the past is done, but that we could learn from it and never repeat the same mistake? And I'm afraid the answer to that is not yet, because we're in the midst of repeating the same mistake right now. So it's complicated. I agree that there is the necessity of destruction because there is the necessity of birth. It's the way things continue on. Someday will come, and we will come back to the balance. The balance is birth, maintenance, death. That is the balance. The things must die so that other things can be born. Can you imagine if nobody ever died? Wow, there's 8 billion people in this world. If nobody ever died, we wouldn't be here for maybe another year. And that would be a really horrible year. So there has to be destruction of some sort so that there's birth of something else. The big question is, what are we birthing? What are we birthing? You know? And you're all in this room, such a beautiful sangha of like-minded individuals. You know what your vision is of birthing, unity and love and God consciousness and this. Then we have our work set out for us. We have our work set out for us to be less like the Nazi and more like Gandhi and, you know.
I have a question.
Yes.
So, okay. I appreciate the cycle idea, but somehow we got to learn from this.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so just because things cycle doesn't mean that's going to be forever that way.
It won't be.
There's a learning curve that somehow has to be brought in to the cultural consciousness.
Absolutely.
To learn from why things happen. The economic issues that drove Germany in that direction, for example. So, and other things too. So, right now I'm involved in a project trying to anticipate what the year 2060 will look like.
Oh, wow.
Now, we have to go beyond just looking at cycles, because that way you will just get into a cyclic rut. It's not an easy task when you start thinking about it. So part of what we're doing is not thinking about it. We're becoming intuitive, if we can. See where that leads us. So there's a real challenge here.
Absolutely. And I completely agree. It's important that there's a learning curve. Yeah. But we can't control that learning curve. Because some are willing to learn, some are not willing to learn, some are willing to learn partially, some are willing to learn the east side, some are willing to learn the west side, some are willing to learn the north, and some are willing to learn the south. And one will become so emblazoned with their wisdom of the south that they will negate the wisdom of the north. Right? Watch Game of Thrones? Yeah. Right? You know, so the learning curve in and of itself is a cycle.
And the factors that feed into it. Look at the last page of the Washington Post. I read an evening. It's a real nice summary of robotics and how that's going to affect our lives not too far in the future. Think about the impact of that.
Yes.
In terms of jobs lost to robots. And the population will keep increasing, which is another issue that will feed in to the magnitude of the cycle one way or another.
Yeah.
So these are factors that are going to be complicating the future.
I like
Technology.
to think that our intention and our intuition is it has the potential to become powerful enough that we recognize what we must do.
That's the point of getting.
Yeah. And if it can become powerful enough that we recognize what we must do, then my suggestion, if I threw that into the hat of suggestions, would be it has to be done from the grassroots up. It has to be small pocket communities that have complete agency and have self-sustainability, and who on some level are also committed to the greater virtues of living, and that they share those greater virtues with other communities. Because once we get into a situation where a country of 400 million people and less than 1%, less than one, like so much less than 1%, have the control and the resources, those robotics are a scary thing. They're a scary thing. I would never tell anybody what to think. I'm not telling you what to think, but kind of my perception on what you're saying, Dale, and I really appreciate everything everybody has been saying, is this. There's so much fear right now about Bernie Sanders because people are mislabeling him as a communist and all these other things and talking about, giving away government welfare and whatnot. Let's talk about those robotics, shall we? And all the people that's going to put out of work. Where does this master entrepreneurialism come into play when you've got a robot? What are you going to do with the people? Let them live in the gutter?
That's the problem. I see.
That's absolutely the problem. So we need to have a different framework for our government, one that is less concerned with the robotics and more concerned with the quality of life of the people. Because otherwise, and I'll open it up for a few more questions after this, otherwise what will end up happening is a very complex fear will take hold, even more than it already has, and it will black out the truth. Period. It'll black out the truth. Because when a person is living in the gutter with no food, no clean water, no education, no health care, what do they care about the truth? A few might care about it, but most are more concerned with what they're going to put in their belly. Yeah. So it's powerful. That's a powerful, we could have a whole conversation.
Yeah, I'm wondering if that might be more of a myopic observation, because we haven't addressed the question of artificial intelligence and the development of consciousness in robotics. We may be transitioning from a flesh and blood being into a being of steel and whatever, wires and so on, that might develop its own consciousness and own way of progression. It's still part of the universe.
Absolutely it is. And isn't that an amazing conversation too? Yeah.
Their knees done, their hips done,
Yeah.
now the plate in knees.
So here's the thing. If you're going to have like LASIK surgery, right, is all robotic now. So if LASIK surgery is all robotic and there's very, very few humans necessary in that entire process except maybe the patient, why do we have to pay for it?
Yeah, what's minimum wage for a robot?
But tying in with Craig's reference to the fire in Yellowstone, I hadn't heard about that. But the rebirthing, focusing on that for a moment.
Yes.
A pastor told me many years ago there would be no nation state of Israel without the Holocaust. Speaking of the Yellowstone fire. So that I think you need to remember there is a positive somewhere in the negative.
Always.
Always.
Every cloud has a silver lining.
Yes.
And every cloud also has the sun behind it.
Right.
Without exception. Without exception. And the thing that we can look at and learn, hopefully, is that that was the choice that was made at that time. But there are 10,000 different ways to get to the top of the mountain.
Mm-hmm.
From here to the Jersey Shore, there's 10,000 roads that you can take, or you can ride a bike, or you can take a bus, or a train, or a helicopter, or a plane, or I don't know, maybe you can disapparate and then apparate. Yeah. There's 10,000 different ways to do everything. Maybe the instigation of Nazi Germany is to teach us how not to make that type of decision. But again, I don't think we've learned.
Just read the Old Testament. The Israelites, it took them a very long time to learn.
Mm-hmm.
But it even took 2,000 years to get back into the land of Israel almost.
Yeah.
But the thing is, God said it, they're going to return sometime.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they have.
Yeah.
And people thought they would wipe them out, and they couldn't.
Yeah.
I
on the other
got here late, but I was interested just in the word truth.
Mm.
And how would you define truth? And
Yeah.
how important is truth? In fact, I wrote a book, and the word truth is in it.
What is your name?
David Rathman.
Nice to meet you, David.
Yeah, the name of my book is If Only Truth Mattered in Family Law. So my opening, I get to a place where I'm defining truth.
Mm.
So how do you tell who's telling the truth? You know, it doesn't matter if people tell the truth or don't, but the truth always is.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, my simple definition of truth is, which is so amazing. Then when I thought about of Jesus Christ calling himself the I am. Why? He's showing he exists. He is.
Mm-hmm.
So he can say he's the truth because he is.
Absolutely.
But the other thing would have been, of course, that was the thing that God said from the burning bush. Who do men say that, or who, you know, I guess Moses asked him. He says, I am that I am. So God is. He does exist.
And if we cultivate the proper virtues within ourselves, then we can come to completely accept that. But if we're cultivating instead the virtues of the ego,
there's also a book called Loving What Is.
Yes, absolutely. Radical acceptance.
Accepting what is.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a couple thoughts. One is because I do so much meditation, I'll go up to Hawk Mountain and I'll sit there and plant my boots and the ants will start crawling over them and I'll go into beginner's mind and I'll know that all is well. The challenge is to do that when I'm reading the New York Times. Because then I go into judgment, and as soon as I go into judgment, I'm into suffering, I'm in a state of sin, I could do something wrong. I could yell or be angry or be upset with someone. And because I do psychotherapy, I'm always drawing people down out of that upset state of mind into the awareness of the presence. And that's what heals. So my second question is, when I was in the ashram, they said, this is Kali Yuga, this is the crazy time,
Kali Yuga.
where everything is polarized. So could you speak to that as a larger cycle?
Oh, sure. So depending on the lineage, some people break it down a little bit differently, but typically there are 4 yugas. A yuga is an era, and the amount of time that an era lasts, that a yuga lasts, has been said to be 10,800 years, 100,800 years, 1,800,000 years, or the blink of Brahma's eye. Brahma's God. So it's a really long time. And it is, again, it's the cycle. So if you look at the symbol Om, you'll see that it's like a 3, and then there's a little tail loop here, and there's a half circle and a dot on top. And that represents the 4 states of being. The waking state, the dreaming state, the sleeping state, and the state of what's called Turiya, or awakening, enlightenment. The 4 yugas line up to the Om very similarly. There are 4 eras that we will go through between the birth and the dissolution of the universe. These 4 eras are the waking state, And that is generally a state when things are good, abundant, birthing. The sleeping state, which is typically a state where there's a lot of lethargy, confusion, and ignorance. The third state, which is a very deep, dark state, which is the Kali Yuga. And that is a state where ignorance is the rule. Ignorance is more presence than awakening. And people, they say in certain scriptures, people will believe they have awakened when in fact they are practicing harm. And things get worse before they get better. But then there is a shift, and it is a big shift. It is like the age of Aquarius shift. It's like huge. And we leap over into Turiya, and that is a state of absolute abundance. And people get along. And some of the things that some of the great sages through time have said is people no longer eat animals. People no longer engage in war. People no longer see superficial differences between them. All people know God. But inevitably, we go back to sleep. So we are now in the Kali Yuga, and there's some discussion about where we are in that. Some people say that we're on the cusp of the awakening. Not according to my lineage and to many, many lineages. They say we are in the middle of it. And it actually is going to get worse before it gets better. Yeah, it's actually going to get a little bit worse before it gets better. So knowing that we're in the middle of a cycle. So we come back to the cycle. We're in the midst of this cycle. What can we do? How can we commit ourselves to being of greater service, not only to humanity, but to the world itself? And without offending anybody's tendencies in here, we don't need to practice conversion in order to do this. We just need to be like God. In other words, virtuous, non-harming, supportive, peaceful, and with unity. We don't need to go to our neighbor and say, you must do the same thing I'm doing or you're bad. On some very small scale level, that type of mentality is what led to Nazi Germany. We want to do the opposite. We want to teach by example. Be the best person you can be in all given situations. I think Christ said, I don't remember which one, you'll help me out with this, Harry, which book it was. He said, somebody slaps one cheek, then turn and offer them the other one. Wow. What do you have to do in your life starting today to prepare yourself to be able to do that?
Don't take it personally.
Oh, there we go.
Key.
God is impersonal. God is impersonal. Mm-hmm. Our human love is not God love. Those are two different things. It's such a great conversation. Can we just stay all afternoon?
Next year. Do you have the same speakers every year? You know, different speakers every month, though, this group. It's only the second one I've come to.
Are you on our mailing list? No. Well, you should get on there, and then you'll find out what's happening.
Yes, but I mean, if she wants to talk on that topic, you know, if you come every year. Then
oh yeah, I think I'm doing another one too, actually, this year. I don't remember what.
Yes, well, when we wrap this up,
yeah, we'll talk about
that. But I want to keep the conversation.
Yeah, let's keep it going. So impersonal. So my guru, my teacher, my spiritual teacher, he and Swami Shivananda, the founder of the lineage in the 1800s, says, MYOB. Mind your own business. Yeah. And then science tells us this. Science. So if some people don't like kind of the MYOB part of it, then science tells us 100% of everything will resolve itself without your input.
Did you say without your input?
Yeah. Yeah. So the next time that you feel compelled to leap forward and tell that other person how everything that they believe and that they think is completely wrong, remember that that will resolve itself in God's time. Be mindful of your words, because perhaps your harmful words will only deepen their enthusiasm over their belief system. But maybe space, by not engaging in corrupt language and behavior, will actually empower them to see a little bit more of that progressively greater truth faster.
Going higher versus lower.
That's right. Exactly. Yeah. Yes?
Can I ask you a couple of questions here? You know, I always think of monks as male.
Yeah.
You're just like rabbis, I always thought of as male until I take charge of the, what?
Yeah.
Until you met a female rabbi.
Oh yeah, I got a book from her, I saw something, you know, put in our church library.
Yeah.
But, so if you're a monk, but you're not necessarily a Christian monk, or
No, it's very interesting. It's a very good question. So I'm a Hindu. I'm within a Hindu order that's called the Saraswati order. You are correct. There are not many female monks. It's just 95% of monks have always been, actually 99% have always been male. There's always been one or two females here and there, but typically most monastic orders have been male-oriented. And so the order that I belong to is part of the Sanatana Dharma tradition, or the Hindu tradition. But I myself, as a monk, I do not call myself a Hindu. I call myself a child of God. And I agree very much with the Baha'i that every single tradition progressively brings us closer to the truth. We just have to listen to it through ears that are open and a heart that is open. Otherwise, we get lost in suffering. So I can speak to Christians, I can speak to Jewish, I can speak to Muslims. You know, I have complete respect for all traditions. My practices come from the Hindu tradition. Yeah. And yes, I'm a woman monk. I actually recently had dinner with this very wonderful Jewish family, and the women who were there, they got me in the kitchen, and they were like, "This is just so awesome. Does this mean that we'll have more women rabbis soon?" And I said, maybe.
Yes,
you know,
maybe.
Yeah, there are women monks, but there's just not many. What was your other question, love?
I don't know, I think it was in with both of those, you know, about whether if you were a Christian monk or the female side of it.
I wanted to speak to your question of what we can do, because I've put a lot of thought into that, because I only impact a small circle of people directly, but I'm interested in doing the most that I can do. And the person who most models the behavior that I admire was Thich Nhat Hanh.
Oh, yes.
Because he was in the middle of the war itself in Vietnam and had to learn how to stay peaceful when people were killing each other right around him and coming into the temple and stealing the food and things like that. And so he became so immovable, he took such strong positions that were harmless positions. He became so harmless, they kicked him out of the country. And so he went to the UN and other places where he could influence people, and he became harmless in front of them. He taught people how to harm less. And then he went, of course, and founded Plum Village, which was a place where you could go and learn how to do that. And then he wrote such wonderful books about all of it. So to me, that's, you know, every day I strive to be more like him and, you know, fall flat on my face, but at least it's a beginning.
You go higher instead of lower.
Yeah, exactly.
Simple. Higher, not lower.
Yeah. Well, such an amazing human being he is. Such an amazing human being. His work, all of his work is profound, but there's one book in particular that I carried around with me for a long time, Be Free Where You Are. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's a little green book. It's about this big. It's like 78 pages. Very quick read. It's the discourse that he gave at the Maryland State Penitentiary to both the guards and the prisoners, talking about how they perceive their circumstances as not being free. That the guards can come and go as they want, but they still see themselves as imprisoned. And yet, and here are the prisoners who see themselves as imprisoned, but who often also have recidivism rates, because once they get what they think is freedom, they don't know what to do with it. So where you are at any given moment, what can you do to embrace your inherent freedom? It's such a good book. Yes?
I don't know where I read it anymore, but they were talking about teaching meditation to prisoners. And one prisoner, I think he was a young man, and started meditating, and he said he felt freer than he had ever felt in his life, outside.
Yeah. He
was freer in jail meditating.
Meditation is called Raja Yoga. Raja means royal. It's the highest form of practice, because it brings you right there. When you're meditating and you're in that state of absolute surrender, you're in God's country completely, and it changes you. It changes you wholly and holistically. And when a typical individual comes into a consistent meditation practice, they can't help but become more compassionate, more service-oriented, more devout, more humble, because within that meditation, it's realized that in the larger spectrum of the universe, we're a dot. But our dot has meaning because it contributes to a bigger picture. Therefore, we need to contribute by practicing the virtues.
We have time for about maybe one more question.
Any other questions or reflections?
I wanted to ask you to repeat the title of that book on truth that you read from the 50s. That you named your daughter.
Well, I don't know whether I would recommend it, but it's the name of it was The Dharma Bums. And Jack Kerouac, who wrote on many of these things too. Well, we want to thank Swamini Ji Shraddhananda for being with us, and thank you so much for what an awesome, enlightening, stimulating discussion. And grateful that that you're here and we were able to have this conversation. As far as what's coming up, we have next month Craig on the meaning of myth. And do you want to say a little bit about that?
No.
What I want from you is this week a short write-up so I can publicize it.
Okay. Yeah, I'll whip something up and send it to you.
All right. And at Soul Cafe in March, we will have Charlie on mindfulness. And I don't know if you want to say anything about that.
Well, it's going to be half talk and half experiential, because I want you to leave knowing what it's like and that you can do it.
Okay.
And what's the date on that?
I don't have the dates in front of me.
Third Tuesday.
Third Tuesday, 10 o'clock a.m.
Yeah.
And that's at the Wyomissing
Restaurant.
Yeah, that would be great.
If you're not on our mailing list or our email list, please give me your name and your email so that we can let you know, and I'll be sending out an update at the end of this week for next month. And then in April, we are going to visit the ashram.
Yes, yay!
And do you want to say anything about
Sure.
what to expect there?
So the ashram is located on Basket Road up in Alsace, so it's about 8 minutes from here. It's the old Alsace Consolidated Elementary School. I had a vision when I was in India. I was so touched by the ashram structure there that I wanted to develop one here. So my husband and I began our search, and we ended up in this area. The ashram is a spiritual school. It's a sanctuary. It's a place of meditation. It's a vegetarian environment. When you walk in, you'll see lots of Hindu tradition there. You'll see statues of Shiva and Ganesha, but it's also it's a space that's open to anybody. The denomination that you belong to is not our concern. That is your personal freedom and choice, and your personal relationship with God. We have we do yoga classes, meditation classes. We provide personal retreats, trainings. Every Sunday morning, I do Satsang, which is followed by Arati, and Arati is a fire ceremony. And the word Arati means complete love. So we take part in this fire ceremony at our Ganesha altar in order to heighten our intention to be part of that complete love and to dissolve whatever resistances that we have to that. And yeah, it's a peaceful environment. You're going to walk in and you're just probably, if most people say when they step in, they're struck by the stillness. That it's a very peaceful, still place. Marsha's been there; she can share.
It's full of beautiful murals, beautiful artwork on the walls.
Yeah, lots of murals too. Absolutely.
All the talk of Ganesh. Do you have elephants?
Oh, I would like an elephant. I think they might be against the town ordinance.
Yeah. Will we be going directly to the ashram, meeting there,
Yes,
or coming
I'll have
here
directions in the update.
Okay, so we don't come here first. We come
No,
before
there's
the
no
ashram.
point in that.
Makes
And it'll be at 10 o'clock.
At 10 o'clock.
Is that all right?
Yeah, absolutely. And then that's going to be about an hour and a half. So
You're in charge,
if
so-
those who are open to it, we can do Arati while you're there. If you're open to it, you can either witness it if you like to. You can have the choice to go in during that time period and meditate for a little bit and experience the meditation temple, or experience the Arati and do a little satsang if you like as well.
Wonderful.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, I look forward to seeing you all there. It really is a very special place, but every place is a special place. And people oftentimes when they come, they say, "This is so not the real world." And I'm like, "No, this is so not the real world. Like now I got to go back to the real world." And I say, "No, the only world that is real is the one that you create for yourself. That's it. And this is the world that we choose to create. So let's create the best possible world we can, and have it be consistent." It's such an honor to be here with each and every one of you. I'd like to thank you all so much for attending and for taking part in the conversation, for sharing your comments and your questions. I'd like to thank Harry. He's been doing this work for so long. Such a blessing to the community. And I'm so grateful to know you and to be here.
And we're hoping to continue this even after this congregation dissolves. We don't know what's going to happen with the building yet, but plan on being here for a while too.
You're hoping to keep the location here?
I'm hoping to.
Okay.
And talking about place, if we go to Writers in March 7th, I'm doing the subject of the power of place.
Oh, okay. March 7th.
That's a great topic. Yeah. And if whatever happens, if you're looking, let me know.
Okay.
If you need a space to hold meetings or whatnot.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
I thought
To
some
go to
other
writers.
religions were coming in here now, and I must have misread that. I thought
I'm
it was
sorry?
I thought yous were selling, and that other religions were.
No, we're not selling. We have 3 worshiping groups here now. 2 are Haitian. The Center for Spiritual Living meets in this room. But we have a lot of arts groups that come in here too, the Reading Theater Project and so on. So we want to encourage this as a kind of community center. But we have to find a legal entity that would actually take over the operation of it. So we're still having conversation. And you're all invited to our meeting on Thursday for interested parties that might be wanting to use the building. So we have that at
So you no longer have worship on Sundays? We stopped the worship on Sundays?
On May 31st will be our last
May
Sunday.
31st.
Yes.
Okay.
Maybe.
Maybe something else will happen.